from the grassroots, connecting people and sharing ideas.
We are back again. Hey, Gowri.
Hi,
Are you okay, Gowri?
I'm fine.
And so we are fine as well, but the bunch of Hong Kongers out there in Hong Kong protesting, they are not fine. Right now, we are going to talk about Hong Kong, democracy in jeopardy. So Hong Kong has always been a democratic nation, even though it merged with China in 1997, which actually they practice a dual system, one country concept in a way that it is still part of China, but when it comes to how it governs itself, it is very much democratic. It takes no answers from Beijing. So with the reputation of Hong Kong being the center of trade in Southeast Asia, it is important that Hong Kong remain a very democratic state, and that shows in the way Hong Kongers value its own freedom not only to trade but also freedom as a citizen. And because of that, when protests broke out among students regarding on the upcoming 2017, where Hong Kong politicians will be or administrators will be elected directly or by the Chinese government, they got really mad about it, and that is why it led up to the stage where they staged a mass civil disobedience.
And back in December 2007, Beijing actually said that it will allow the people of Hong Kong to directly elect their own leader in 2017 and their legislators by 2020. But 2 years later, the Hong Kong authorities unveiled proposals for political reform in response to pressure for greater democracy, including an enlarged legislative council. But critics said that move does not go far enough, that it's not very effective. And then in June 2014, China's cabinet issues policy document on Hong Kong that affirms that while the voting public in Hong Kong can elect their own leader in 2017, only candidates who are accepted by Beijing can be actually put on the ballot. And this is another thing that, of course, incited the discontent among the people of Hong Kong. So what happened was 800,000 people cast their votes in the unofficial referendum on free elections in Hong Kong, part of the civil campaign branded illegal by Hong Kong government and by the Communist Party authorities in Beijing.
And just to give a bit of history background about Hong Kong, why Hong Kong is different compared to other places in China or compared to China. Of course, at the end of the spectrum, we have Taiwan. Also, is very much not part of China when it comes to its political system, and it is a country on its own. But for Hong Kong, it's not really a country, but it is an island that governs based on its own democratic system. This is because a few hundred years ago, during the 19th century, Hong Kong was annexed by the Chinese Qing dynasty at the time due to the Opium War and due to a few disagreement between the Hong Kong island occupied British and also the Qing dynasty authorities. And because of that, it was on 1842, it was annexed and Hong Kong island was formed. It is in perpetuity to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland under the Treaty of Nanking. And the British officially established it as the crown colony of the British Kingdom and founded the city of Victoria in the following year. And for almost a couple of decades or hundreds of years, it was somehow being occupied by Japan a couple of years during the 40s, and of course it resumed the British rule and also it was part of the Cold War era, and it ended the open borders in the 1950s, and somehow it reforms and itself, and at the end of at the end of the 1990s, somehow the British give back Hong Kong to the Chinese government. At that time, there were a huge talk. Will it somehow be part of China again, as in like be ruled under the Chinese Chinese Communist Party? And it proved that the two system, one nation concept work. So since 1997 right until now, until before the announcement by the Chinese government, it was fairly a democratic nation.
And this movement is also called Occupy Central, which I think you mentioned earlier that it sounded similar to Occupy, what was that?
Occupy movement all over the world. Of course, it was famously linked to the Occupy movement in the US.
And they have actually made two demands in their referendum, and it's been translated to English, so I'm just going to read it out. One is the immediate withdrawal of NPCSC's decision on the framework for Hong Kong's political reform, and the other one is the swift resumption of the political reform consultation. The Leung Chun-ying administration has failed in the political reform process, and we demand Leung resubmits a new political reform report to the central government which fully reflects the Hong Kong people's aspirations for democracy. And if Leung refuses to respond, the action will escalate. And today's statement also added that 2 nights of occupation of Civic Square in Admiralty have completely embodied the awakening of Hong Kong people's desire to decide their own lives. So in a way, if you look at it, it's something that is positive because it started out, of course, in their own minds. They all want a better future for their country, and so many of them have come together to fight for the same cause, and they're all gathered in the square. And if you look at the pictures, of course, the number is really, really huge, and they even intimidate the police in the country. As I have one tweet here that says the police were actually forced to retreat due to the size of crowd that were in Occupy Central.
They used tear gas. They haven't been using it since 2005. So it is a really serious matter for them to resort to tear gas and water cannon. And even though the Hong Kong people staged a mass protest, at the same time the government response is very much aligned with Beijing. This is what C.Y. Leung said in the afternoon of of his own news press conference about the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government. Is they are absolutely opposing the unlawful occupation of the government building. They actually run into all these government buildings and occupied it, which is such an irony. And he also addressed that he urged Hong Kong residents to express their dissatisfaction with the political process in a safe and lawful manner. And with this, he said that he wants to have electoral reform shortly to appeal to pro-democracy activists to engage in rational discussion through lawful means. So what he's saying here, rather than protest and occupying government buildings, why don't you come and sit together with us and do a mutual consultation or what's the best way forward? So as we all know, there are more than 5 million eligible voters in Hong Kong to elect the chief executive in 2017 for the first time in Hong Kong's history by one person, one vote. So why don't you be part of this? In fact, the Chinese central government, China, is confident that the Hong Kong government can handle the movement lawfully. So by this, it seems like what the government is looking is, I'm talking about the Hong Kong government, is the future of Hong Kong is definitely a part of China. It's no longer a two-system concept. So even though they are allowed to vote for the 2017 administration, they are not allowed to choose who are the candidates that they can be part of the list of names that can be voted.
And that list has to go through Beijing first, and if only if it's approved by them, then these people can vote for the person that they want, and that is the main thing that they are not happy about. And apart from that, Leung Chon-ying also called this protest an illegal protest. But then again, if he were to just round up a few people to sit down and talk about it, will he know how many people are actually feeling strongly about this? If he doesn't see the hundreds and thousands of people who actually come down, yes, maybe it's inconvenient in a way, it's disrupting convenience and all, but it is important for people, I think, to come together and show the government that they all have the similar interest, that they really want this and they are serious about this.
It's a chicken and egg thing. The government do not want them to do mass protests because it will somehow undermine the law and jeopardize social tranquility. And besides, they claim that this is illegal. But at the same time, if they don't do protests, like you said, how would the government know that the people of Hong Kong are not happy with this move? They want to elect their own people to sit to be the one governing them, not someone that is being elected by the Chinese government. And one thing interesting, their country that is practicing what the system that has been suggested by the Chinese government. One of it is Iran. Iran politicians, even though they practice democracy in a way that everyone can vote for their prime minister, or whoever that will be governing the affairs of the Iranian people. But at the same time, the list of candidates or politicians that can be part of this campaign or election, their name have to go through the approval of the Ayatollah and the Supreme Council. In a way, it's not as democratic as we would assume it is. So in a sense, this is similar to the model that we can see in Iran.
And that also doesn't make sense in a way, because if they are really serious about giving Hong Kong the democracy it deserves, then you just go all the way and do it. Why do it half and half? Why say that you can have a democratic election, but we are going to choose the candidates for you? And of course, they are not going to be happy about that because they want to decide their own future.
But interestingly, the Hong Kong government don't think it that way. This is what he was telling to the media, that the nomination process for the 2017 election were not that restrictive, and it is really unfounded for those claims to be raised. And this is what he exactly said. We have not even started to discuss the detail but crucial aspects of the nominating process for potential chief executive candidates. This will be the subject of public consultation to be launched soon, which will eventually lead to the enabling legislation or on changes to the electoral methods for the 2017 election. So what he's saying is this emotional outburst by the Hong Kong people is unfounded, and in fact there are so many processes that is involved that couldn't possibly show that the Chinese government is the one behind as the mastermind of this election 2017 election.
And they also said that this is the most successful protest in Hong Kong's Hong Kong's history in my lifetime, said Mr. Wong, who is one of the protesters there at the square. And he was standing beside a double-decker bus that had been abandoned by a street driver who wanted to help the students block the area. So there are also a lot of pictures here where the students and also everyone else there, how they were attacked with the tear gas, and people were rushing to help each other, and you see them coming together that way as well. And in a way, they get closer and more united in their cause.
Majority of them are in fact students, and very, very young students. One of it is Joshua Wong. He's only 17. He's the founder of pro-democracy student group Scholarism. And in 2012, he led as many as 120 people in a protest that overturned a pro-communist school curriculum in Hong Kong. It shows that the younger generation in Hong Kong are really politically aware of what kind of direction and who should be the ones governing their own country. And this is actually very positive. A good developed country it is a country where the younger generation are politically and economically aware of their future direction.
And at the same time, that is also something that most governments fear. They always try to educate the young people. They try to give them as much education exposure as possible. But the moment those people start thinking for themselves and they realize that, hey, this is not right, this should change, and then they start getting suppressed by the authority or by certain oppressive laws, and then they don't get to actually make use of their education to bring change to the country.
Talking about Malaysia, we somehow are facing similar sort of, I would say, brainwashing. Would that be the right word, or would it be too much of a word to describe it?
I think it's more of a fear instilling kind of process where we speak out, speak our minds, our opinions, and that is considered unacceptable by certain groups of people. And then we always have to go through certain filters to make sure that we don't offend anybody. And that makes it really hard for us to communicate and to voice out.
Could that be the reason why we are living in a nation where people become more communal? As you know, the more they understand Malaysia, because in a way that that's the only safe space for them to be able to move freely. But in the context of Hong Kong, it's interesting that they are moving towards the idea of occupied movement. They are occupying government buildings. They are trying to tell the government that this is not the right way to do. But also the government of Hong Kong are not listening, which shows that how much power China is having on Hong Kong, and that it somehow is controlling the political system and the politicians in Hong Kong.
And it's a very tricky thing because there are two countries involved here. It's not just Hong Kong, it's Hong Kong, and then there's also Beijing interfering into their matters. And it's something that is very tricky to solve. And of course the protest is not going to solve anything, but the protest is important for the people to voice out their concern against what's going on, and to let both Beijing and the Hong Kong authorities know that they are not okay with it, because otherwise then the government would just go ahead with what they've decided and say, okay, no one's protesting, no one's saying anything about this, so let's just go ahead and do it this way.
Mm-hmm. And what it seems like that is happening right now is all of them continue to stay on with the protest. In fact, they are being very, very they are being very, very much aware of what to prepare. Some of them are already having rolls of plastic wraps around themselves, and also eye shield. And I think learning from Malaysia's experience of protesting, they should bring salt. It will reduce watery eyes if
and
you are being
put. The burning in the eyes.
And the burning in the eyes. You join as well.
Well, actually, I'm from Penang, and that never happened in Penang, thankfully. But I read a lot of news and a lot of guidelines even for people who are attending rallies as to what to bring, what not to bring, and what to do.
And at the end of the day, it's the right to protest. Let's say you're unhappy with a piece of legislation, you think that your right as a citizen is being undermined. You should have the right to protest. You shouldn't have to be afraid to the extent where you have to bring all this gear with you and all this medication and protection just for you to be able to voice up your opinion.
But to be fair, we did also have a peaceful protest here.
I'm referring to Hong Kong.
Okay. Well, because going back to the GST, we were there for that one, and there was no tear gas, no batons, and we were allowed to gather, and there were people from all over Malaysia there for different cause with kind of which kind of changed the course of the whole protest.
And for government all over the world, learning from this sort of experience, knowing that protests will inevitably happen, why don't you just let it be? Because at the end of the day, a suppressive government will somehow get a bad PR for themselves, and governments from other countries will not be able to trust them.
And if I may quote my favorite author, Ki Tuan Chai, on this, he said, if a government does not provide you with your basic rights and what you need, then that government doesn't deserve to be your government. And I firmly believe in that, and I think we all in this country firmly believe in that, which is why we speak up when something is not right and when our basic rights are not met by the government, and we feel like, hey, this is not how things should be.
Okay, let's put in the perspective of the Chinese government. Perhaps that is the perspective of majority of the Hong Kong public. For the Chinese government, why only now they want to take control, or at least a proxy control over Hong Kong by controlling the nomination process itself? The question that the answers that perhaps you can raise out of this question is somehow the Hong Kong government, the Chinese government realized Hong Kong is the center of trade all over Asia and perhaps all over the world, if one of the center of trade all over the world. In fact, it has somehow surpassed London as the most expensive city in the world. It shows that Hong Kong is really, really a money-making machine, if you can say that. And controlling Hong Kong, I'm talking about China, definitely would add more economical benefit to the Communist Party. That would be one of the issues that can be raised out of this.
Yeah, this reminds me of England and Scotland again, when Scotland was trying to get independent, but it was important for England to keep them for, of course, the economic benefits because of the oil revenues and all. So it always somehow goes back to economic benefits and advantages. And it could be the same, but in case of Scotland, they actually had the votes and all, and it seems that Scotland wanted to stay, which is fine. But in the case of Hong Kong, we see the protesters who are not happy, so probably it's time to change something.
As we all know, Hong Kong is one of the financial centers in the world, or in Asia in that sense. So controlling Hong Kong would mean that China will move up one tier forward. It could be in competition with the US as the biggest economies in the world.
But of course, that cannot happen with the protests, with people who are not happy, who are discontent with it. So they probably have to reconsider their action plan to take over.
The future will evolve on its own. Let's just see what will happen next. So that's all for our ABC Focus.
And good luck to all the Hong Kong protesters. I hope they achieve what they want.
And with that, we will continue with our dialogue
in a bit.
Fadli from Eco Nights.